Why, hello everybody. Welcome back. It's Captain Mikey. We are here in episode 2 of Ship Explorer. Once again, we are going to be exploring the Morrow Castle, but this time we are going to be exploring her fatal fire. So without any further ado, let's get right into it, shall we? We'll start out with this newsreel. I could have sworn there was some sound to it, but I guess not. I don't know too much about the ship or the passengers. I don't know like names or anything like that. But I do know that she caught fire, and the fire is well, it's suspicious. Or as everyone says nowadays, it's sus. Alright, that was a pretty short reel. Wow. September 8th, 1934. A fire breaks out inside the first class writing room. Soon the entire ship is engulfed in a fierce blaze. Woo! It's like everything except the bridge is ablaze. Alright, here we go. We are in a fierce storm. So, well, I guess we'll do what I did in the first episode. Start from the top and work our way down. Look at the flames coming out of there. Alright, well, let's start right here, I guess. Acting Captain William Worms stood and shouted orders from the bridge wings, but his voice could hardly be heard above the roar of the wind and commotion below. At the lifeboats, to his disdain, the boats were loaded, mostly with crew, and launched before he could order them filled with passengers. I don't think we're going to hear Mike Brady's voice in this one. Oh, look. You can kind of see into the bridge, but I don't see any equipment in there. And I don't know if there's any photographs laying about. Oh my god. Yeah. That is crazy. Look, you can see lifeboats out in the water. The radio operator is Chief George Rogers, Second George Elgina, and Third Charles Mackey worked to send distress calls from the radio room until their set exploded, and they were forced out by flames and smoke. Chief Operator George Rogers' actions have long been considered with deep suspicion because, despite the obviously dire situation, he refused to send a distress call until Alagana could get direct approval from the bridge. Alagana set out to find a senior officer for the go-ahead, but thick smoke made it difficult for him to find his way around, and when at last he came across Acting Captain William Worms, it took him some time to approve the SOS. Wow. Crew promenade. So can I still blow the ship's horn? Yes, I can. Was it too long blast for abandoned ship? Or is that 5 shorter ones? That is so eerie. I think that one's down there, I think. Got like hot metal. Big hull vents like this sucked fresh air down into the ship to the boiler rooms and cabins alike. But they also, crucially, supplied fresh air to public rooms. With Morrow Castle's bow pointed into the near gale-like conditions, the wind was funneled into the vents that only fed the flames with a huge volume of fresh air, helping the fire surge and spread throughout the ship. Oh, I believe it. Oh my god, look at that. It's all charred and melting. Got sparks flying everywhere. And it doesn't seem like I can burn or anything. Like, I don't think you can die in this game. Oh, here's these buckets that are supposed to help put out fires. A lot of good they're doing right now. Just sitting there. It doesn't seem like there's much. Like nowhere near as much of those things to find. Alright, let's continue. Okay, so I can walk directly into the fire and not burn alive. Well, I guess that's good at least. I'm invincible. Okay, we got some buckets here strewn about. Maybe they tried to use them. That doorway is completely blocked. Okay, we got another point here. Morrow Castle mounted a Lyle gun, a kind of cannon designed to fire a rescue line and buoy to a waiting nearby ship to help with rapid evacuation. The gun needed a considerable gunpowder charge to operate, which was stored above the writing room. Around 3 a.m., the charge erupted once the flames had got to it, creating an even bigger hole in the ship's superstructure that allowed even more air to rush in. It set fire surging through the interior towards cabins where people still slept. That's pretty horrifying. People were burned alive. Well, let's climb the funnel. Anything up here? Nope. But you can definitely see the flames down below. I'm not really seeing anything here. Alright. We'll do the same thing here. We'll go up top and then we'll come right back down after we're done looking at this. Such a disaster. Oh yeah, I can't get through there. I forgot. Alright, we'll head back down. This video is probably going to be a lot shorter than the first episode. Ow. Oh my god. That sucks. Wow, does that suck. Dr. Theodore Vosler and his wife Catherine were birthed here in Suite A2. Catherine woke up to the smell of smoke, alerted her husband. They managed to escape the burning ship by seeking shelter on the forecastle deck. At the very bow, which didn't burn, eventually clambering down a rope ladder to a lifeboat from the rescue ship Monarch of Bermuda. What do we got here? Boats 2 and 4 were still poised over the boat deck when the fire caught them. They burned in their davits when the falls broke, and they were sent crashing over the side. Jeez. Okay, I see. It's upside down. This is the cabin of Max Burliner. Less than an hour before the fire had been hosting a party here, directly above the writing room and the source of the fire. He might have been awakened by the flames, but had no chance for escape. After the fire, a number of items were found inside, including cufflinks, a wristwatch, his Masonic ring, and some remains. It is so sad. 37-year-old silk merchant David Schneider was birthed here in A12. He was woken up by the smoke and rushed out in his pajamas. Helping women and children into their life belts, he clambered down a rope and into a lifeboat and was rescued after 5 hours. He later testified that he had tried to persuade crewmen to give up their life preservers for passengers, but some refused. One apparently told him, "I am sorry, I can't swim. I need the life preserver for myself." Very little was recovered from his cabin, just some keys and American and Cuban coins. 45-year-old passenger Frank Melody occupied stateroom A14. He made it out of his stateroom and into the water. but did not survive the night, and his body was recovered sometime later. Wow. That is so sad. You escape death from fire, but you die in the cold, freezing water. So tragic. Okay, so what do we got here? Looks like we got a whole bunch of different points here. Ohio-born Angelus D. Orne occupied A-16 and traveled frequently between the U.S. and Havana. Because she had married a Cuban, she was traveling with her Whippet dog on this voyage and was awakened by the flames, actually surging into her cabin. With only seconds to spare, she hauled herself through her cabin window, sustaining burns to her hands, arms, and face. Her Whippet was left behind. Oh, that's so sad. Its remains were found as well as a pen knife, 2 thimbles, a metal address book cover, the melted remnants of a watch, some buckles, parts of a medal, used jewelry, and some rosary beads. Because of the heat of the fire, most of the metal artifacts were melted and difficult to identify. Oh my god, that is so sad. That poor dog. That poor dog. Lifeboats 6 and 8 on the port side were closest to the blaze origin. They were never launched and caught fire as the blaze began to spread when the Morrow Castle washed up at Ashbury Park. When the Morrow Castle washed up at Ashbury Park the next day, the boats were still in place at their davits. 13-year-old Robert Gonzalez was being sent by his wealthy parents to study in the U.S. He occupied the stateroom A-18 and, like his neighbors, was also caught by surprise by the advancing flames as they came into his cabin. He rushed to escape and ended up badly burned on the boat deck outside. Bobby, as he was known, made it into the water with assistant purser Thomas Torres, who tried to save him and spoke with him in Spanish, but Gonzalez passed away in the water. Oh. Okay, so upon inspecting these lifeboats, you can see clearly this one is completely split in two and burned, and this one is like half hanging off the davit. Okay. Lifeboat 10 was freed and lowered over the side, but it fouled on the ship's hull and toppled, reaching the water with just 2 people inside. It was dragged along by the ship, with the 2 men unable to free it until, with brute force, they managed to bash the hooks off and the boat drifted away from the Morrow Castle. So we'll enter on the other side, okay? Ooh. Hints. Night watchman William Torres and a small group were struggling with boat 12 when they realized the fire was getting too close. They abandoned the boat at the last minute, and it was consumed by fire. In the end, only 1 boat was ever lowered from the port side. Wow. That is... This is just incredible. I believe I can get down here. Yes, I can. But maybe I'll just do it like how I did before. Yeah, I'm not seeing any other little things over here. My wife, Rose, and I were awakened at 3 a.m. Not by any member of the crew, but by the passengers. They told us the boat was on fire. Mrs. Lerner and I rushed out to the deck. We were on A deck, the top deck. Flames were beating all around. There were no ship's officers in sight, and what members of the crew there were going around did not seem to know what it was all about or what to do. The men tried to calm the women, and we all sang, "Hail, hail, the gang's all here." I ran around looking for one of the ship's officers, and I couldn't find one. When I came back to Mrs. Lerner, the flames had driven the people on the boat deck to the rail. The cables on a number of lifeboats had burned through, and the boats were dropping off into the water, with no one in them. The men and women started jumping off. Miss Lerner and I had our life belts on, and we jumped. It must have been almost 60 feet to the water. I was pretty nearly knocked out. I looked around to try to find my wife and called, but didn't get an answer. Passenger Dr. Samuel Lerner. Man, it's one hell of a story. William Torres had fled from Lifeboat 12 just before it burned on its davits and struggled instead with a group of crewmen to release Lifeboat 11. The suite A23 was occupied by Mrs. Meredith Sands. Is that how you say it? Sands? I'll go with that. And her two daughters, Marta 11 and Margarita 8. The fire moved swiftly through their room, and there was hardly any time to escape. Only Maria made it through her cabin window, badly burned. Remains were later found in the cabin as well as fused coins and melted jewelry. Oh my God, that's terrible. I forget exactly how many people perished in the blaze, but wasn't it like, was it like 120? 123? Upon reaching the upper deck, I was met by billowing clouds of thick smoke which at times threatened suffocation. By lowering my nose and throat into the shoulder of my coat, I was able to get relief during the worst of the smoke that came my way. Everything was in darkness, and all the lights on the ship had already gone out. And I reached the railing. I could just discern a lifeboat pulling away from the ill-fated vessel. I could not, however, see who was in it. Everyone seemed to be standing by, just waiting for orders, and the crew was very much in evidence by its absence. There was, however, a level-headed man in my group who kept assuring everyone to take it easy and to take their time. I have since learned this man was Raymond Egan of New York, who has been reported among the known survivors. Passenger Alma Hill. Alright, come up to this one. This cabin, A21, was occupied by young Braulio Sands Jr. I'm like horrible with names. Just 13 years old, who was traveling with his mother and sisters, but because of his age, he was given his own cabin. Fire swept through the A-deck room so quickly, he was caught completely by surprise and tried to escape. Crew working outside on the boat deck near to here heard shouting from the window and hauled the boy through, but he was badly burned. He was carried down to D deck by a steward, but died on the deck where his body was left to be recovered later on. Oh my god, that's so terrible. Well, we'll go through that. I just want to see if there's anything more. Yeah, there is. Dr. Henry Strouch and his wife Ruth occupied this suite. E19. Neither survived and their bodies were recovered intact, indicating they had escaped their stateroom and made it into the water. Recovered from their suite was a watch and chain, a pair of scissors, and some melted coins. "18-year-old Rosario Camacho was bound for New York, where she had an apartment. She had become friends with Doris Wacker and the Marjorie Budlong, and the trio stayed up late chatting. At about 3:10 a.m., Rosario was showing her friends out when Doris caught sight of the intense blaze consuming the lounge directly below. All three ended up in the water and survived after hours of treading water." Why are all these people on this ship have like such hard first and last names to pronounce? "I was on my way to Europe on a mission for the Cuban Bureau of General Culture, of which I am the director. But I am only going to make one more sea voyage homeward. I am not going to Europe. This sea trip, this horrible experience, has fulfilled my desire to travel off land. I was in deluxe cabin 15 on A deck. I was awakened about 3 a.m. by a strange noise. It was a crackle as though timber was splintering. Ordinarily, it was not enough to awaken me. Some power was watching over me. Yes, at any rate, I went to the door and opened it. Flames leaped in. I slammed the door shut. Then I went to one of the windows overlooking the deck. I decided to crawl through it. It was quite narrow. I had gotten halfway through when I was convinced I couldn't make it. I pulled back in. Then I saw a sailor on deck. He shouted, 'Come on, lady! Climb through! Don't lose your nerve!' I took courage and managed to get through. Though it was very narrow, I stood on deck about a quarter of an hour while the sailors were trying to put out that terrible fire. There was no passengers whatsoever. It was very strange. They must have been burned to death as they slept. Something that almost happened to me. Passenger Rene Mendez, quote." Wow. Incredible story. Here's another one. 33-year-old Rene Mendez, quote, was a Cuban bureaucrat. She awoke too late to escape her cabin through the door. She was rescued through her cabin window and was one of only 7 passengers to escape the ship in a lifeboat. Jeez. Walter Byron, 49, fled his cabin, A11, and left the ship over the side, down a rope. He survived the night. Recovered from this cabin was a pair of burnt eyeglasses. There's so much stuff to read. Nan Helm, 32, was awakened by the smoke in this cabin, Suite 85, and rushed to the lifeboats. But the heat and smoke forced her to take shelter down on the promenade deck. She eventually lowered herself overboard and survived the night clinging to wreckage. chief engineer, Eben Abbott, had loaded Boat 3 and ordered it over the side, but on the way down it had become stuck. The crew abandoned it and moved forward to get Boat 1 ready. Instead, Boat 3 was lowered later after another group tried again. Oh, jeez. Jeez Louise. Lifeboat number 1 was in the middle of being loaded for launching when first-class passenger Renee Mendez Capote was dramatically pulled from her burning cabin's window. She was hauled into the boat, and it went over the side holding just 3 other passengers and some 27 of the ship's crew, including the chief engineer, Eben Abbott. Oh, wow. Alright, so are we ready to go see an interior? Wow. Okay. Leaving their friend Rosario Camacho's cabin late at night after a long evening chat, Doris Wacker and I can't even pronounce that name, Budlong, were stunned to stand in this exact spot and see crewmen struggling below with buckets of water to contain a blaze that seemed to be raging out of control from the writing room. Yeah, I'd be pretty amazed too. I was just about getting to bed and I heard the hammering and pounding of pots and pans in the hallways and whatnot, and they were screaming that there was a fire on the ship. Now we had never had a fire drill, we'd never had a boat drill, and I went down by the porthole where the sink was, and I looked out and the whole ocean was red. It was a terrible sight, and I knew something was really wrong. I immediately put on my life preserver. It was an old-fashioned cork arrangement, and I took it off, and my roommate gave his life preserver to a woman who was standing in the hall. Passenger George Watremez. Okay. My friend Doris Wacker and I were up until 3 o'clock visiting the stateroom of a shipboard friend. As we left for our own stateroom, we saw flames in the passageway. Doris rushed to her parents and wakened them. They came back buckling their life belts and bringing one for me. We all went up on sea deck. Everything was confusion there. We couldn't see to get into a lifeboat. Flames kept advancing towards us. A little knot of people clustered around us. Then I heard a steward say, "We'd better jump." We all hold hands and jumped together. Passenger, I'm not going to pronounce that. Budlong. Okay. Again, why are there so many passengers with, like, names you cannot pronounce? Alright, let's, we're gonna head down. Oh, there's more over here. Jeez, just when I think it's the end. Catherine Cochran was asleep when the fire roared through her cabin. She never made it out. Later, found in her cabin were rings, small diamonds, eyeglasses, and her remains still in the mattress springs. I was asleep in my cabin when it seemed to me about 3 a.m. I awoke to smell a pungent odor of smoke. I heard a banging on the door and rose quickly. The passageway outside my cabin was a mass of flames through which there was plainly no escape for me. I slammed the door and rushed to the porthole, which fortunately was at deck level. Through the porthole, I leapt to the deck and ran to a nearby lifeboat. There was much rushing about on the deck, but no apparent panic. I tumbled into the lifeboat, which was already tightly packed with people. It seemed to me that I waited through eternity, though it may not have been more than 15 minutes, before members of the crew got the lifeboat off davits and let it into the boiling sea. The front part of the ship was a pillar of flame. I do not believe any passengers who got caught in the hold or cabin at any point in the ship beyond the library had a chance of escaping. Passenger Dr. Charles Cochrane. And what does this one say? This is the cabin of Dr. Charles Cochrane. His sister Catherine was asleep in the stateroom next door. He made it out by clambering through this window and into a lifeboat which eventually washed ashore. Alright, let's go to the forecastle now. I said that this video was going to be quicker. I'm not so sure. There's so much stuff to read. There is literally so much stuff to read. Morrow Castle's remaining officers and crew came together at the forecastle deck, where the fire hadn't reached. Acting Captain William Worms had realized that to give his passengers the best chance of survival, the ship had to be kept close to the Jersey shore. So he ordered the anchor brakes released, and they both tumbled to grip firmly on the seafloor. The next day, when Morrow Castle needed to be towed away, the crew had no choice but to cut through the chains with hacksaws to release it. Wow. That is just incredible. Theodore and Catherine Bosler sheltered here with the remaining crew through the night until rescue came the next morning. Theodore recalled that a woman was standing alone at one end at one of the gun ports, about midship, on the starboard side of the ship. She was hemmed in by flames. She had no life preserver. A lifeboat from one of the police ships came as close to the burning ship as possible. Due to the high seas, the group called to her to jump, and she was eventually forced out by the intense heat of the blaze. A young crewman at the bow jumped in after her, trying to save her, but she was swept away, and the lad was barely rescued himself. That's incredible. Oh, what's this? Oh, you can ring the bell. Cool. So before we continue our adventure, have to do it. The rigging. Wow. Oh my God. That's incredible. Alright, we're gonna head down down the stairs now. Nothing there. From C deck, we went up to B deck, and it was absolutely abominable. What you saw, the flames were going sky high, and the ship was just whirling. Of course, all this time the ship was in motion, and we see a person, a crew member, I guess, trying to use a hose, and the hose goes dead and the water stops. B deck had no cover on it, so it had plenty of light with all the flames. And on the deck itself, there were shoes and underwear and pants and coats, hats, ladies' handbags, stern all over the deck. That's just before the people jumped overboard. Passengers. George Watt-Tremez. Okay. Wow. Ooh, it's like you can almost feel the heat off that. Yeah, we'll go there in a little bit. Wow. Anything over here? No. The fire reached the aft second-class staircase quickly, driven back along the ship's corridors and through the smoking room. By air funneled in through vent trunking, a cut-off escape for many because for those berthed down inside the ship's hull, this was the main staircase and elevator that provided access to the boat deck high above. With the ship burning from the middle outwards, those at the stern had no way of getting to the lifeboats and had to find other ways of escaping. Holy mackerel. I was awakened in my cabin on D deck around 4 o'clock by the pounding of someone on the door. Fire, they were shouting. Get up and get out. I took it lightly at first, but I roused my boy, putting on a top coat over everything else and giving him a raincoat. We dressed quickly and went up to C deck, where there was water 3 or 4 inches deep. I had forgotten to take life belts. I was about to return when the lights went out. Everyone was rushing, and in the dark I was afraid we'd be killed. On C deck, men were fighting the fire with a hose. We were warned the deck was not safe, and we went back to D deck. Anyway, by now the flames were creeping down the stairs. Passenger Dr. Joseph Bregenstein. Some women were crying. Oh my God. One man, a foreigner, got down on his knees and started praying. Officers went through the crowd after we got up aft and told everyone that the fire was under control. But one looked convinced us he was over-optimistic. The lifeboats were on A deck, but none of us could get them because the fire was eating away the ladders leading up to it. We connected hoses, some passengers helped, and we advanced toward the flames, but they sure were thirsty. Finally, the decks began to get hot, and most of us were barefooted. We saw a couple of the crew jump overboard. We decided to do the same thing as we headed up for the rail. Two girls came up and asked politely, but a little excited, if we'd mind their going along with us. I said, sure, help yourself and jump in. We leaped together. A couple of others thought it was a good idea and followed. Radio Man, Jeremiah, Jerry, Edgerton. It came suddenly in the night. The liner was slipping along as usual, rolling some in the sea that was running. I was off watch, asleep in my bunk, when the general alarm awakened me about 3:30. I thought it was a drill. When I looked out of the deadlight, that's the porthole, I came to with a shock. The fire was reflected on the water. I grabbed a life preserver and shook 3 or other fellows in my bunk and told them to start for their fire stations. There was a wall of fire through midships. Some of the crew told me we had been hit by lightning. We made aft on B deck and a lot of other people, many of them men and women passengers wearing nothing more than their sleeping clothes, were heading the same way, all trying to fasten their life belts as they went. Radio Man, Jamera, Jerry, Edgerton. That's quite interesting. What does this one say? It was about 4 a.m. when the commotion woke me up. I pulled on my trousers and my shirt and my shoes, and I went up on deck. As soon as I got up there, I saw that the smoke and the fire would force me to jump overboard, and I kicked my shoes off. Then the lights went out. Well, I ran to where a lot of passengers were huddled together. I shouted that I was a Catholic priest and asked all the Catholics there to gather around me. I gave them general absolution. As soon as I got through with that, I sought out to each Catholic and gave each one absolution. One of the crew saved my life. He kept putting wet rags over my face to keep the smoke out of my lungs. I thought all the members of the crew I saw acted splendidly. It was pitch black up on deck, and all you could see was billowing smoke and great flames. I think I got around to all the Catholics before the lifeboat came up, and about 35 of us. The last people on the boat so far as we knew slid down the ropes. Passenger Reverend Raymond Egan. Yeah, it's quite interesting to hear these passengers' tales. That's to go in there. We'll go in there in just a second. I just want to make sure there's nothing else. I don't think there is. Oh wait, here's something. Around 1 a.m. I went to my cabin alone and went to bed. With the ship still rocking, I put the extra pillows on the floor as cushioning, in case I fell out of my upper bunk. There was a loud knock on the door. Put on your life preservers and come on deck. The ship is on fire. We put on our robes, shoes, and life jackets. We had no time to think of taking any personal belongings. We ran to the elevator and saw a flame shooting out of its door. We opted for the outside steep stairway that was now filled with people. As I remember, there was quite good order among the passengers. We ran aft towards the upper B deck. I felt turning my ankle. Someone helped me up. Nearby stood our waiter, Brooklyn. So I said, "Hi, Brooklyn." No reply. I looked at him closer and saw the blank stare in his eyes, and I realized he was in shock. A shiver went through me, for now I was fully aware of the disaster that was happening. Passenger Dorothy Muller. That is quite a story. So there's something right here too. Okay, night watchman Harold Orch had been one of the first to discover the fire and ran madly to the bridge to report it. Acting Captain Worms later said, "I sent my own friend Harry Forsh to his death. Time after time he went into the burning staterooms and corridors to get people to safety. I sent him back one too many times. Remains found in this exact spot in the promenade deck were identified as being Harold's." Oh man. That's terrible. So sad. So alright, here we are on the lower portion of the interior first class lounge and ballroom. We can see the piano's on fire. Second Officer Clarence Hackney had come down to see what was happening, and then, shocked by the state of affairs, rushed back to inform the bridge, but he neglected to order the ship's fire doors shut, so the flames could creep out into passageways and public rooms unchecked. Oops. That's not good. Oh man. Smoke was first spotted pouring from the writing room just before 3 a.m. Stewards and crew rushed to throw buckets of water over it and hook hoses up, but it soon became clear the blaze couldn't be stopped, and it began to creep out into the lounge, fueled by the thick varnish that brought the timber paneling to a fine shine. The ship's firefighting system was completely overwhelmed with water pressure, rapidly dropping from hydrants, since so many were in use at the same time. Ooh boy. Is there any more? The fire was first noticed by a passenger who notified Steward Daniel Campbell that he could smell smoke. Campbell followed the scent into the writing room, where he saw smoke billowing from a small locker at the far end of the room. He went to open it, but burnt his hand. Springing back in pain, he knocked the cabinet open and flames spilled out into the room, which of course sent it into a blaze. Well, yep, the whole room is on fire. Everything's melted and red hot. Okay, alright, let's get out of here. Alright, so here we are on the aft deck. Shortly after 3 o'clock, I was awakened by a person knocking on the door of my stateroom. Arousing myself, I investigated to find it was a steward who advised me that there was a slight fire and that I should throw a coat over my pajamas, in which I was glad get a life preserver from my stateroom and to come up on the upper deck. These things I did and let the stateroom. My stateroom was below, and therefore I had some steps to climb before reaching the deck and the railing. There was no light in the hall and stairways which I traversed, but there was smoke that smelled like burning paint. As my roommate had not yet come back to the stateroom at the time the alarm was given, I was making the trip to the upper deck alone. While there were other passengers on the stairways, there was no one particularly with me, passenger Alma Hill. Now looking over the side, we could see the flames. The whole middle of the ship was on fire. It was an inferno. We heard what we thought was a slight explosion towards the middle of the ship, which by now had listed towards the starboard. The ship's engines stopped, and we were adrift, at the mercy of the crashing waves. On one side of the deck, a priest was praying with a group of people. Where did he come from? When we split up on B-deck, we saw the cruise director, Bob Smith, with a fire hose. Not much water was coming out because the water pumps stopped working when the ship's engines were turned off. He stayed on C-deck for about 15 minutes, but we couldn't stand the smoke any longer. The fire was between us and the lifeboats, and we were told the nearest ones were burning. With no alternative, we climbed over the railing. Passenger Dorothy Mueller. Even this part of the ship is on fire. Anything on this end? Alright, let's climb the mast. Gotta climb the mast. Jesus. Wow. That is incredible. Okay, so I don't think there's anything more over here but towards the fantail. There's Old Glory again. Okay, I see a couple of things. Finally, I felt the vibration of the ship. It stopped. Then I knew the engines had quit. You could see the steel of the ship was alive with fire and smoke and burning. But it wasn't the steel that was burning, it was the point that lead paint. I managed to get to the rail at the real stern of the ship, and I stood up on the rail. I was hanging onto the flagpole, and the last thing I said before I left, I says, "If you don't know how to swim, it's a damn good time to learn." Passenger George Watramitz. We started to go over together, but my foot slipped on the rail and I fell alone. I came up dazed but unhurt, started to swim. The water seemed filled with bodies. They were always bumping into me. Then after a while I found a young man swimming beside me. He didn't have any life preserver and he gasped out that he was tiring. I told him to hang on to mine. He did. It dragged me down a little, but I could still keep my head above the water. I guess that it was about 2 hours that he clung to me. He kept saying I can't hold out much longer. I kept telling him to hold on. We'd surely be picked up soon. Lifeboats were passing us. I shouted to those which passed near us. Most of them kept on going. I guess they couldn't hear. One came so close that I talked to the people in it and asked them to take us aboard. The man, anyway, but they said they were filled up. They promised to come back. It was 4 o'clock. When we went over the side, it was about 6. I guess dawn was just breaking when the young man, a Cuban I believe, said, "I am going. Please send my love to my mother, won't you?" I said, What is your name?" But he didn't seem to hear me. A few minutes later, his hand slipped off, and down he went. I kept paddling around. I wasn't swimming toward any place, but I felt I had to do something to keep warm. About 8:30 a.m., a lifeboat stopped and picked me up. It was from the city of Savannah. Passenger Majori. Oh, yeah, that's the one with the name I couldn't. Yeah. Alright, we'll head up to the docking bridge. Check that out. Anything here? Not that I see. Okay, let's head down. Definitely now we're coming towards the end. Franz and I walked to deck A, and we decided to look for Rosario Camacho, who we had met the day before and was traveling alone. We found her without a life preserver. Both started to remove our preservers. Franz said, "Don't be ridiculous. You know I am the better swimmer." I knew Franz, competed in swimming races. We were ordered by the cruise director, Robert Smith, to the lower deck. After Franz and Rosario passed, Smith said, "Let the women and children first," as the ship kept moving, and we were on the aft deck. The smoke made us cough. After a while, someone shouted that we were going to asphyxiate. This created a panic. Then let's jump. Before I knew it, my chest was against the rail. Then I saw Franz and Rosario holding hands and jumped from the deck above. I thought I could find them if I jumped about 60 feet. I swam away from the propellers towards a group that was holding pieces of wood. After 7 hours, my eyes started to close. I thought I saw a rowboat approaching. I was too weak. I was picked up by the freighter, the city of Savannah. Passenger Joseph Hidalgo. We stood on deck for possibly 3/4 of an hour, and then decided to go overboard, thinking that it would be only a matter of a few minutes or half an hour at most until we were picked up by a boat. It was a half hour by 14 times, for I was in the water just 7 hours. Mr. Egan held me clear of the railing so that I would not strike on the way down, and I dropped into the icy water of the Atlantic Ocean 30 feet below. Passenger Alma Hill. I was asleep in my stateroom on sea deck when somebody shook me. I woke up and smelled smoke and saw flames out of the porthole. I looked at my watch and it was then 3:40 a.m. Saturday. I put on my life belt immediately and went out on deck. Going to the back of the boat, I tried to get to D deck, but the companionway was in flames and I could not make it. Before I got very far toward the back of the boat, a woman stopped me. She said she didn't have a life preserver and she asked me for mine. Well, I gave it to her just to do something for the cause. When I got to the starboard side, I saw a lifeboat being lowered. I saw it was filled with crew members and there was not a single passenger in it. I thought this was unusual, for I had been taught the crew was supposed to worry first about the passengers. Passenger Frank Dittman. I couldn't see anything except confusion. Nobody seemed to know what they wanted to do. A boy about 12 years old, he said his name was Raymond, came up to me and asked me to hold on to his hand. He couldn't find his father. The flames were getting so bad we couldn't stand it any longer. And so I just took the boy in my arms and we dived overboard. I told Raymond to hang on to my back and I swam without a life preserver. Then a corpse floated by and I took the life preserver off it and put it on. But I had a tough time of it because the boy was still with me. We drifted toward shore. I swam for 7 hours, maybe 6.5, with Raymond on my back. Once we went to sleep and slipped off, and to bring him to consciousness again, I almost bit his ear off. We drifted into a crowd, maybe 12, and we all prayed there in the water. An aged woman, maybe 60, was the liveliest one of the lot. I would say she was pretty much all right. She was advising everybody what to do, how to keep their heads up. Passenger Frank Dittman. Okay, wow. So I guess this video is definitely going to be as long as the previous one. Jeez. There is a lot of reading in this. And there's I've noticed there's a lot of spelling errors too. I jumped from the boat when the deck got so hot and the smoke got so bad. I couldn't stand it anymore. It was pitch dark and at first I couldn't see anybody. Then I swam into a man of about 23 or 24 who said his name was John. Presently we met 2 women. They had life belts on, but they couldn't swim and they were scared. So I tried to think of things to say to keep their minds off themselves. I told them to keep kicking, and I told them that maybe we'd all lose a little weight in the water. I asked them first, of course, what their names were, so everyone could be introduced. One woman was named Clintberg, Caroline Clintberg. I don't remember. What's the other one's name was? I have no idea who John was. It was the first time any of us had met. Passenger Ethel Hassel. Or Hassa. I don't know. Oh yeah. The 3 of us jumped together. Dr. Biscuit? Is that how you say it? Biscuit? Bousket? Maybe it's Bousket. I'll just go with Bousket. I and Ophelia, we hit the water so hard that the life belts smashed against our heads with such force that we were practically knocked out for several minutes. When it was obvious we'd be in the water a long time, we held hands. After riding the waves together for many hours, my husband suddenly gasped, "I can't go on." It was terrible. Shortly after, he was swallowed up by the sea. The city of Savannah loomed upon the horizon. Passenger Ophelia Bousquet. 18-year-old Cuban Rosario was part of the crowd that lined the railings, astern, and began to jump overboard. She stood next to her friend, young swimmer Franz, poet, and later wrote, because of his height, he could lean over the rail and breathe comfortably without abandoning the ship. Our coughing and desperate pulls at his shirt did not and could not dislodge him. Finally, as everything turned black before my eyes and I began losing consciousness, I did what later astounded me. With Franz pushing me and total suffocation only seconds away, I thrust my face with my mouth wide open, and before I knew it, what happened, there were my teeth burying themselves into the fleshiest part of that man's upper back. He turned and reeled backwards with a loud scream of pain, and it was this clearance that offered us the opportunity to climb the rail, take one deep breath of fresh air, and brace ourselves for the 30-foot jump. Just as we were about to jump, a gasping man lost his balance on top of the rail and, colliding with Franz, knocked us apart. I went down screaming Franz's name, and that was the last I saw of him. There were flames and smoke between us and the boat deck, and I couldn't get the passengers to go through them to get the lifeboats amidships. So we got life preservers and made the passengers put them on. Then we tried to get them to jump, but the deck was over 30 feet above the water, and none of them would go over. So we started pushing some of them over and lowering others on ropes. But one old woman got tangled in a rope. She was screaming, and Chirig Johnson, a carpenter, climbed down the rope and cut her loose, and they both fell into the sea. After that, we couldn't get anyone to go down the lines. I jumped overboard into the middle of the group of 25. We could see the lights on shore. They didn't seem so far away, and that gave us hope. Headwater, Charles Wright. What's headwater? Is that head waiter? Okay, this is a wonderful thing happened at the stern of that ship. A Catholic priest, I think his name was Father Egan, turned his back to the flames that were driving us overboard, held up his hand, and calmly said, "Let us pray." Then he gave us general absolution. The flames came nearer, and we jumped. The sea was lashed by a gale at the time. The waves were tremendous, but we held each other's hand, swimming as well as we could. We were buffeted around terribly, and Agnes became very weak after several hours. Time passed by slowly. Agnes became hysterical when we saw an airplane fly overhead. The aviator waved to us, and we knew he intended directing rescuers to us. Just then, an especially high wave swept over us, and I felt Agnes' hand wrenched away. I never saw her after that. 5 minutes later, a pleasure boat came along and picked us up. Passenger Helen Brody. Wow. Oh boy, that's a lot. Alright, now we're on our final deck, and then we'll call it an episode. Whoa, look at that. You have shoes right here. And garments. That is crazy. Nothing on this side. You can see deck, stairway. Wow, nothing on this way. Okay. I guess we read them all. Wow. Well, alright everybody. I'm going to call that an episode. I'm going to leave that right here with a nice view of the bow of the Morrow Castle burning. So, everybody, please stay tuned for episode 3, where we will walk around the SS United States. That's going to be really cool. So, thank you guys for watching. Make sure you guys like and subscribe. And I will see you guys in the next video. Goodbye for now.